everybody. Craig Havighurst here for The String for WMOT. Excited about my guest today. She is a singer, a songwriter, one of the world's greatest mandolin players, and a veteran performing and touring artist, and old friend of mine now, Sierra Hull.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Sierra.
How's
it's
it going?
Really good to see you.
So good to be here.
And to talk about a new record. I know you're kind of on the circuit getting this thing out. Has a distilled version of this record and what it means kind of come to you? Have you been able to boil it down into an elevator pitch for what Tiptoe Highwire, coming March 7th, is about?
Well, it's funny, the title kind of comes from a song on the record called Spitfire. But I felt like there's so many things, like that song was kind of inspired by my grandma, and who was just this, there's a lyric in there, tougher than thorns on a bra, and she was definitely that. And when I think about resilience and fearlessness, the being bold, she was a very fiery, bold woman, and so as I was kind of thinking about what this album is about, and this moment in time is my first independent release. It's my first release in about 5 years, and in these past few years I've got to do a lot of my own music and exploring, but also I've got to do a lot of really special collaborations. I've learned a lot through just getting to be up close to so many great other artists and be inspired by that and the things that you bring back to your own music.
Right.
And so part of a Tiptoe Highwire for me is kind of a bit of a metaphor for stepping out in this new kind of slightly scary place, but trying to be bold enough to do it, and kind of on one hand juggling my desire to create music that feels new and kind of pushing my boundaries, trying to move my own, I guess, artistic vision forward a little bit, and that because I love progressive music, I love the opportunities to do those kind of collaborations, and on the instrumental side especially. But then I grew up a bluegrass girl at heart, and I just I love the simplicity of a 3-chord song, and I love lyrics. So I really kind of felt like this was a moment of all these things kind of coming together, where it's like I wanted to make a record that had that progressive feeling thing, but also kind of leaned back into my roots a little bit, and being my first independent release, kind of stepping out and trying to present all the things I've learned over the last few years.
Cool. All right. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's focus on that independent point. You put your last record out in 2020 after a long run with Rounder Records, who found you when you were in your mid-teens, and you put your first record out, I think, at 16 years old. Mm-hmm. So what felt different about that album in 2020 and preparing it and getting it ready versus now? And did you know you'd be indie when you started pulling together the songs and hit the studio for Tiptoe?
I didn't know 100% that was what I was going to do, I think, but it was the end of sort of a long run that I'd had with Rounder, and one that I'm so grateful for. I mean, when I was a kid growing up playing bluegrass music, it was like Rounder was one of the premier, if not the premier label for the music I was growing up and loving. And I can't tell you how many album covers I would stare at and dream of making my own someday. Even as a little 8-9-year-old kid, I knew this is what I wanted to do, and I would flip over that CD cover and that Rounder logo would be on there. So I remember even drawing up little fake artwork. I used to love to do art when I was a kid, so I drew pictures of myself on stage with my heroes, even some of them before I met them, and I remember making a faux little album cover that had the Rounder logo on the back. So to have the opportunity, I signed with Rounder when I was 13, put out my first record at 16, and I kind of just continued to take my time to make the records. So I didn't just, I made 4 records for them, but they all had quite a bit of time in between each of them. So by the time I got to the end of that my kind of contractual obligations there, if you will, that was the 25 Trips album. And when that ended, just respectfully, I just kind of felt like, well, I'm not ready to sign back right now. I think I owe it to myself to just take a minute and not have to feel like I didn't have another album in the can, like ready to go, that needed to be rushed out or anything. And my last record came out right a week into the pandemic. So as the world was shutting down and my record came out, and then my contract, was kind of finally over, it was just kind of like, okay, well, that was a beautiful run, and who knows, it's like I didn't know if I would sign back with Rounder or someone else or what I was going to do. I just thought I owed it to myself to take a minute and really just, think about what I wanted the music to be. What would the music be like if, I didn't have any outside voices. And, financially, thankfully, I was able to just make the record, and so it felt like an opportunity to just do it. And then, I was open to the idea maybe of it having a label home somewhere. But when I started really looking at the options and, talking to my team about it, we live in such a different landscape now than we did when I was 13, So the idea of being able to just have this direct to consumer, direct to my fans, really, and have the ability to decide how and when it gets put out feels really empowering in a way, and to own my masters and things like that, So
Great.
I don't know if I'll always be indie, but it's exciting, and it's a new learning experience for me, because I think most people start their careers indie and then hope to get signed.
That's a good point.
I was sort of the opposite of that. I've never got to do this.
Right,
So,
right.
it's like I started with a label right away, and I've always had that. So this just feels like a real exciting moment to be independent.
That's great. What about the producing of the record? Whose other ears were you trusting besides your own?
Well, a few people. So I'm really lucky to have a really good set of ears that lives in my house, and that's my husband Justin.
Right.
he's a
Justin
great
Moses, great. We'll talk about him in a bit.
Yeah, he's a great person to have in my corner, and I feel like we're always kind of juggling ideas off of one another, and kind of able to be those outside ears, but also like he's been part of it since the very beginning. He heard these songs long before they were recorded. He heard stuff right after it was tracked. So he's been such a great person to have in my corner throughout the whole process. My bandmates that I used on this record are just so incredible, and I'm really fortunate that I get to have them on the road as well. But like the fact that they're a big part of this record has been really special for me, and what they bring to the table. And then of course none other than the amazing Shawnee Gandhi, who's just like one of my favorite engineers. We did my 25 Trips album together,
Right.
and became very close friends through that process.
Oh, cool.
So it was a really natural progression on this album. It was different because on 25 Trips, I called her. We didn't know who we're going to play on the record. I had a batch of songs. We sort of started from the ground up working on this record.
Mm-hmm.
This record was a little bit different in that, I was choosing the songs and the musicians and kind of the arrangements, but she's such an amazing engineer that I knew sonically she would be able to capture it in the way that I wanted. And I care so much as a musician about the quality of the tones, and as an acoustic musician,
Yep.
it's a tricky kind of music to really capture well,
Yeah.
and she does such a great job of that. And because we had already a rapport working together, it was just a real easy flow of knowing that there was a lot of trust I could put in her to deliver something I could be proud of.
Remember that name, folks. Shawnee Gandhi's a growing force in our business, and she's a superb engineer. And I'm glad you brought her up. That's really cool. So let's talk about the band in detail, because I got to see you twice last year, and it was a revelation. I hadn't seen you with that band, and I don't know how recently they came together. But what struck me, one of the things that struck me, was that they were some of the just absolutely top-tier acoustic players I'd ever heard, but they were not the familiar names from the IBMA award winners and the Nashville Cats. So who are they, and how'd you find them? How did you pull this group together? I feel you like ran off to some other second dimension and brought them back, because I thought, I'm supposed to know who these cats are.
I know. It's funny because I do have a lot of people be like, who are these guys?
Mm-hmm.
And more people really, taking note of them makes me so happy as their friend, because, they're so amazing. And I've learned a lot from getting to share the stage with these guys. But the guitarist is a guy named Sean Richardson. Sean, he's a Michigan guy, but he's been in Nashville a long time. And actually he does tons of session work these days. days, but he came to town, toured with Daly and Vincent for a long time, for a few years. And so I first met him, I believe, when he was touring with them for a little bit. And then when I was thinking about who might be great to go on the road, at the time I was thinking, well, it'd be awesome if it was somebody that was a great acoustic player, but maybe could also play a little bit of electric if need be, maybe even sings a little bit of harmony. And I just knew Sean was a super talented guy. Didn't know him that well, but like we can do these days, you can kind of stalk people on the internet and hear their clips on YouTube and Instagram. And I was just a fan kind of from afar. And so,
great way to start. Yep.
So reached out and, he was down to come play a couple shows with me in I guess it was May of 21, right after things were kind of just opening back up. Right. This was sort of the core band that I put together. And then Avery Merritt, the fiddle player, he went to Berklee. I'm a little older than him, so we weren't there at the same time, but we had mutual friends, and I remember meeting him maybe briefly at Chris Eldridge's house for some pickin' party or something one time a long time ago. And again, just somebody that I kind of knew of, had kind of, you meet these musicians and it's not that you like log them necessarily in your mind thinking, well, one day I'm going to call that person, but just people that you're kind of like, wow, that's a talented person and I'm going to be a fan and kind of watch what they're doing. And so I knew he was just a really talented, person that had just moved to Nashville, and I thought, well, I was like, so I was like, he just moved to town. That's a plus, having people that you're working with in the same town. So I reached out to him and was like, hey, I have these few shows. Would you want to come out and do these shows with me? Jeff Saunders was playing bass with us at the time. Jeff I had met because he was on the road with Mark O'Connor some, and we'd crossed paths. And so that was the first kind of 3 people, and then even going back a little bit further, though, Mark Rodabaugh, who's playing drums with us, like drums were new for me. Yeah. I had never had drums in my band. Wasn't even sure if I wanted them in my band for a long time because I had a bluegrass band with, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, guitar for a long time early in my career. Around the time we first met, my first couple of records were around that kind of lineup. Then I made the Weighted Mind album, which stripped everything down to mostly just mandolin and bass, working with Ethan Yojevitz, great bass player. And then when the 25 Trips album came out, I was like, okay, we had drums on a little bit of it, not that much of it, but some of it. And I was kind of toying around with like, is this something I want to be able to like take that sound on the road, and what would that be like? And it's tricky because as a mandolin player, you're basically the drummer of the bluegrass ensemble, and the rhythmic elements that make the mandolin so interesting and fun can kind of easily get covered up by drums. Drums are, they can be loud, and in an acoustic setting, it's just not any old Joe really makes sense to just join an acoustic ensemble like that, Exactly right. Even if they're a great drummer, it just might not be the right like dynamic fit and the right finesse. And I heard Mark Rodabaugh play, and he at something here in town, and I just remember thinking there had been somebody else that had played in the band before, great drummer, but it was like, pretty loud. And then Mark sat down at the kit with, I forget even what the show was. It was like something like the 5-spot or something. And I remember just being kind of captivated by, wow, this guy pulls like amazing tone out of and I always laugh and say, I don't speak drums, I grew up a bluegrasser, so I'm like, hey, can you do a little bit of this or a little less of that, Yeah. It's like, I'm definitely that person that communicates with the boom boom when talking about drums, but but like, it's easy to tell like if somebody has that kind of finesse or not, and the tone that Mark was bringing. And so then we were at a festival together, and he ended up just sitting in with me for a couple songs. We invited him to sit in on a couple songs that did have drums from 25 Trips, just to kind of like see what it was like. It was a festival in North Carolina, and it was just really easy. And so I remember thinking, well, maybe when the 25 Trips album comes out, I'll just like take him out for a run and just kind of see how it goes. And we only got to do like a couple shows, and then the world shut down and the whole tour canceled. So we didn't really have the chance to do it. So I felt like with, this kind of time around, being at that point, my record was a year and a half old by the time, May of 21 rolled around. So it was kind of like a chance to finally play some of those songs to a live audience with the band. But also at that point, I'd been writing a ton of other stuff. So, there was an opportunity to kind of explore what the next chapter may be.
Yeah.
And what this band might sound like, kind of workshopping some of those songs. So I just kind of, as I was writing, started throwing songs toward this ensemble.
That's
and
what
it just,
I thought was
and
happening.
it just felt very like natural, and
Yeah.
it felt exciting to be in this, what felt like a more of a band setting again after having played with such a stripped down thing where, Anyway, that's the long answer.
Since I first encountered Mark Rodabaugh in your world, then I've seen him everywhere since. The guy really is a wonderful player. And I was going to say, it seemed like in your sets last year that some of this material popped up. So you came to these sessions with some arrangements and some experience working through them, right?
Yeah, and even some of the songs, that I wrote with these people in mind, which is a different kind of thing,
cool,
Yeah. Songs like... Come Out of My Blues was written, like the song actually, that one was already written. I wrote that with Pat McLaughlin.
Yeah, I want to talk about that one.
Yeah,
let's
great,
go into it.
Yeah, a great, songwriter here in town. But we wrote this, and it's one of the, most of the songs on this record were things that I either had started writing, some in which thinking about this band being able to play it, and then some, not necessarily for this band, but had a lyric start or something that I felt like a melodic idea that I was already stewing on. Come Out of My Blues wasn't that. It came, like Pat came with the opening lyrics to this song, and I just thought it was just this sweet kind of fun song. And we wrote it more as just a straight ahead country thing. And then I was...
And can we just talk for a second about who Pat McLaughlin is for people to know that he's one of the most extraordinary songwriters and performers in Nashville, who his day as a performer is sort of in the past. He'll still play a gig here and there, and they're like where all the musicians want to be, because he's so powerful. He's an astonishing sort of Delbert-like singer.
Yeah.
And he's in his 70s now, but he's still just like this lean, mean-looking, incredible cat, and I'm just so thrilled that you got to write with him. It's kind of a study in contrast. I wouldn't look at you and think, you need to be with Pat McLaughlin, but it worked.
Well, he was on my list of people I wanted to write with, because I had been also, credible in his own right, but also, he wrote songs with John Prine, and the song Summer's End I was such a fan of, and even kind of covered my own version of that song. And I, after John passed especially, I just thought, man, it would be cool to get together and write a song with Pat, not necessarily in John's memory, but kind of. I just kind of thought that would be a special thing for me to get to do, and he agreed. David Ferguson, who I'd worked with on a lot of the Sturgill records and things like that, a producer here in town, is good friends with Pat and connected us, and so he came over. We wrote this song, and then the melody ended up shifting because... kind of by accident. I was actually changing strings. I had the E strings on my mandolin, which are normally the first two strings are tuned to E, but I was just kind of winding the strings up, and I had them in like a split tuned thing and was just kind of playing around, and I was like, well, that's kind of fun. And even going back, you don't hear it that much, but even Bill Monroe had a tune called Get Up John, or something like Last Days on Earth. He would sometimes experiment with these tunings on the mandolin.
Right.
So it wasn't the Get Up John tuning, but it was kind of reminding me of that. And I thought, man, I'd like that. It'd be fun to write something that had this. So I just started playing around with like what that opening little cross picking thing is on that track, and thinking about what I would want to sing. Like if I wrote something like this, I would want it to be fun, and I would want it to be kind of almost like an old time fiddle banjo-y kind of thing. And I didn't have any lyrics in front of me at the time, but we had just written Come Out of My Blues with kind of more of the country melody. And just kind of as a filler, I just pulled up those lyrics and was like, something like these lyrics would be fun. And it just kind of fit. And then in my mind, I was like, well, I can't use these lyrics. I got to find something kind of like this. But then I kind of kept going back to it. And finally I thought, gosh. So I called Pat and I was like, hey, I said, I love this song that we wrote. And I said, but I have this other melody that I just feel like really suits the band and the kind of live thing that, like, like, I don't know if the version or the other song, Come Out of My Blues, would have been a really cool song for someone else, but didn't really feel like it fit with my own personal thing that I might do, you know?
Okay.
And so he so graciously let me take our lyrics and put it with this melody.
Wild.
And sort of marry it to a new idea.
And then it just blows up into this amazing sort of stomping Irish pulsing ride of a jam. The song is the record's incredible.
Oh gosh, thanks, Craig.
Like when did the instrument? So you're saying that sort of instrumental?
I wanted
notion,
that. I wanted that, and that's what I felt like I couldn't shift our other melody into that. But I sort of had this idea for something that would be a lyric turned into fiddle, fun, like you said, just that kind of foot stomping thing. I just wanted something like that this band could sort of play that felt joyful. And I just thought these lyrics, they made me feel joyful in the way the melody made me feel joyful. So I kept going back to those lyrics. And so when he, so sweetly was like, yeah, do it, like take it, like let's do it. And the song wouldn't have been the song without him. He's the one that had the opening lyric and the idea to start with. So it was very kind of him to let me kind of morph the melody into this other thing. But yeah, songs like that like I wrote Let's Go, I wrote thinking about the band. There's Lord, That's a Long Way. One of the instrumentals on the record was definitely written from the thought of like having a particular thing that I wanted to be able to play that I thought this band could like sound interesting on and kind of marry the bluegrass but progressive side of things with the drum actually having a role that just wasn't a train beat, So, I don't know. It's interesting how that can happen and shape the way you write sometimes.
Totally. I want to talk about Boom, the first single, which had its own musical germination, as I understand it, and it's we've been enjoying it, and I've saw it live, and here it is. So what? And it's the first song on the record. So what's the story with Boom?
Well, I wrote Boom with a guy named Adam Wright, who is an amazing songwriter.
Such a talent.
I mean, just great dude. I'm such a fan of his playing, singing, and writing. Just such a talented guy. And funny enough, we had never even met before, but we had a Zoom co-write together. First time ever writing or meeting via Zoom.
Oh, wow.
In the height of the pandemic. And we wrote Boom.
How about
and
that?
so I had this guitar riff idea that, I ended up playing acoustic guitar on the record because at the time that was sort of, what the song was written around, and then played mandolin as well. And then Sean's playing the electric part on there. But live, he's normally playing acoustic. I play the mandolin. But yeah, that song was one of the first songs that we recorded. The first session we did for the record, we recorded Boom. And it felt like one of those songs that is a little different than some of the stuff I've done. I mean, I've done some like, happy bluegrass kind of sounding stuff, but you go back to some of the other things that I tend to write. Sometimes it's a little bit more introspective and kind of, I don't know. And so part of this record, I wanted to write some things that felt really joyful to, when talking about like standing on a stage and things that make you feel, excited about playing. Like Boom's one of those songs, because we had started workshopping it live a little bit and then it made its way onto the record. It's one of those things when it pops up on the set list, I think because we play a fair amount of complex music, and there's certain things the guys always joke about, this show, you can't snooze on this show. You got to kind of stay alert. And, there's a lot to think about, if you're really going to try to execute the whole thing well. But then there's, we all need songs that you can just be like, okay, yeah, this is fun. And like something about that song makes me feel like I can kind of almost like play it like a listener, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like there's a relaxed feeling that I getting to play this song, and the way that the energy of it feels. And so I knew I wanted some stuff like that on this record. So I felt like that song almost started to shape what came after it on the record.
Oh, okay.
If that makes sense.
And the cyclical groove in there is very at home in the newgrass space. It does have a kind of boom chick feel if you think about it halftime, and then you get into this great soloing. There's the acoustic guitar and the electric guitar trading licks. Now, is that you?
I'm on acoustic.
You're
Sean's
on
on electric. Yeah.
Right, and then you kick in your own mandolin solo.
And then I overdub the
You're
mandolin.
all over this record. Oh, it's a great track.
Thank you.
You mentioned one of the instrumentals. There's two on the record. I love your instrumentals. I love bluegrass and newgrass instrumentals.
Thanks.
And one thing that it made me think about was how your extensive experience with Bela Fleck on the My Bluegrass Heart recording and tours had to have sort of been stewing in your mind in just terms of what's possible with this acoustic ensemble. That record stretched even the stuff that we all have loved about Bela, even beyond what we'd heard from him before. Can you talk about the experience with him? You certainly knew him before and had played with music with him, but that was a particularly intense set of songs. They were difficult. They brought in a lot of jazz and some atonal stuff. And was there a little bit of imprint here? And just how do you approach the instrumental composing?
Yeah, inevitable imprint. I think, that's kind of the beauty of getting to step outside my own thing at periods of time and, go step into somebody else's world for a moment. Even for a short period of time, you can be excited about, what you can bring back to your own thing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like if you go to, a concert, and you may feel this way as a writer, like if I go and I get to sit in the pews at the Ryman and watch an incredible show, it's almost like I can't help, because I'm a musician too, I'm like studying almost and being inspired by what I'm watching and always thinking about, wow, however this is making me feel in the ways I love, how can I bring that back to my own thing? It makes me feel excited to then go return to my own thing. Yeah. And getting to work with somebody like Bela or some of these great people I've got to collaborate with kind of does that same thing. It's like a real up close, even though I'm like part of it, it's almost like I'm still getting to just see it up close,
Okay.
In this way that then I can be excited about the things that I love about that and bringing back to it. So, Bela, we had worked together on my Weighted Mind record with him producing it. He played a little bit on it. We'd sat in together at festivals. We'd certainly played music together. Yeah,
but that was certainly not a fireworks record. That was not an instrumental forward record. It was a voice forward record.
Exactly. And also, working as a producer and working on my music was very different and incredible, getting to work with him in that level. But then it was fun to kind of flip to the other side of that and work on a more instrumentally driven thing that's his music that I'm just then part of, and one of the most driven people I know, his musical output is just so constant and at such a high level. And then night after night to get to play with that incredible band, with Brian Sutton and Michael Cleveland and my husband Justin Moses, Mark Schatz, it's just inspired, is putting it lightly. And, somebody like Bela, his ability to improvise on such a high level and just night after night after night, just a constant slew of new ideas. It's really something to get to be around and kind of pushes you to at least try to rise up from where you currently are to a new musical place.
Mm-hmm. You did have among the many musicians, I was excited to watch you stretch and play a little more chromatically, a little more. It was more of a jazz feeling. I'm sure you had a few Berklee flashbacks there.
Well, it's such a good opportunity to get to be in a situation that allows you that freedom to kind of stretch and the kind of the moment. So it's funny, something like E-Tune as well. I'll say that tune has been around for a really long time. I wrote that even. That was around when we made Weighted Mind, and we almost recorded it. The first person I ever showed the tune to and played it with was Ethan Yojevitz, who I made the Weighted Mind record with. And we almost recorded it, then decided we didn't need it for Weighted Mind, so we didn't end up recording it. Then when 25 Trips came around, I did a session where we had some other musicians on it, kind of tracked it. But again, I just wasn't feeling it. But it was still kind of continued to be and have versions of it in my live show from time to time. And it started to kind of become a staple of the live show where people would be like, what about E-Tune? Where can I get that?
How about that? Good, yeah.
Where can I get that? And so this time, I finally, when I started playing with this particular band, I kind of thought, now this feels like this is really clicked. After all these kind of versions of the tune, this finally feels like it. But still, I was like, it just still feels like something's missing. And we had recorded the tune already, but then I was like, man, wonder if Bela would just play on this. I think banjo could be so cool on this. And so I sent him the tune. He was totally down to do it. And after Bela played on it, I really felt like, okay, this time it's coming on the record. This feels like that we finally captured what this tune.
Interesting. The banjo was there, and it was so natural, I think, that I didn't notice that the banjo hadn't been there, and that suddenly there was.
I know. It's like
banjo driving.
Probably shouldn't spoil it, but funny enough, yeah, I recorded Bela's banjo part in the dressing room of the Dakota Jazz green room, or the venue on tour. So
it's the only way to pin him down.
That's right. I mean, got to get that man's talents when you can.
Well, what a superb mix of stuff. There's a beautiful ballad in Redbird. You mentioned Spitfire, which was inspired by your granny, and so one more note on that, because I think we're going to hear that one too in this hour.
Yeah, I mean, this song, I kind of I forget why, but just the word Spitfire was brought up somewhere, and I thought, if you think about the meaning of that word, I was like, kind of just made me think of my granny, who was kind of this, she was a fiery woman who didn't, take no crap from nobody, but at the same time, like the sweetest, gentlest, like would go to the end of the earth for you. I could walk in her house any day unannounced, and she'd just be there with arms wide open, just the queen of making fried apple pies, and just grew up in this time too. All my family on both sides of my family, actually, from, you've been to my hometown, Birdstown there,
Yeah.
but my folks are from the next town over, Jamestown, and the kind of Fentress County area. And, you're like an hour off the interstate. There's not a whole lot there. Going back generations, as far back as we kind of know, my family's been right there in Tennessee.
Cool.
And, Granny didn't have money. None of my families had a lot of money throughout, growing up. She grew up, growing all their own food. And, I think she went to like the 6th grade, not a super educated woman, and then went to go work in the tobacco fields and things like that.
Right.
So she just, life had made her tough. And then the things that she had to go through, I mean, even the opening verse talks about, young love, 1 month a wife, the river took him under, took his life. I mean, her husband drowned right in front of her when she was a 17-year-old, just married woman. And, even kind of going through more of the song, it's like, I probably could have written 10 more verses about so many of the things that she had lived with from a young woman all the way to her older years, but somehow she kept going, and the resilience of that. I think about, what that does to somebody. But it's a bit of a sad song, but I mean it in the most beautiful of ways, because, I think of my granny as a really beautiful, joyful woman who was just tough, And so if I'm ever feeling a little like life's getting a little hard, I can always just remember my granny, and her resilience.
Nice. It sounds like one of the most personal songs on here that really is from a specific place in your life story. Well, fantastic. We've talked about some of your collaborations, and you mentioned how nourishing they were. I wanted to ask you about a couple that I saw you involved in over the past 3 years. Corey Wong and you seem like a terrific match. He's Mr. Enthusiasm and Mr. Funky. And was that an extensive thing? I saw you did some shows. I don't know, what was the story with Corey?
Yeah, well, Corey and I didn't know each other really at all, but we have mutual friends for sure. A guy named Eddie Barbash, who's a phenomenal saxophone player, had actually come out and done some shows with me. I remember hearing Eddie play like some Stuart Duncan fiddle solo on the saxophone, and like his timing and execution was so much like a fiddle player that I was like, who is this guy? And I didn't think I needed to play with saxophone, but I think I need to play with this guy, So he and I became friends. We played together a lot, and you'll often see him in the horn section in Corey's band when they're touring. But somehow he, I guess maybe Eddie had told Corey about working with me, or I'm not 100% sure how he came to know my music, but he hit me up on Instagram during the pandemic and was like, "Hey, I'm working on this acoustic guitar project, and I'm wondering wondering if you'd want to be featured on one of the tracks. So I was like, yeah, of course, send it my way. And I had the best time playing on his track. I just did it remotely from home, and we collaborated. Then we kind of stayed in touch, and I did his podcast. We did a couple just collaborative things online as we were all kind of doing during the pandemic, as things were kind of finding creative ways to kind of keep music flowing. And so he ended up inviting me to come out and open some shows for his tour. And so I went out and I opened solo for most of it, and then like the rhythm section would join me for a couple songs at the end of my set. Then great. I would sit in with them for some of their set as well. That was the first tour we did together, and it was just such a fun, easy fit. And then he invited me on another tour with the concept this time, instead of opening, to actually have the band play some of my music, including have their horn arranger like arrange some cool parts. So like we did songs like 25 Trips and Weight of Mind that they played with me, and it was so fun. Just such a fun, easy pairing. It's a bit conventional sounding if you think, well, how's that going to work? But somehow, stepping into it, Corey's such a great curator of putting really talented musicians around himself.
Yeah, it seems
and
that way.
So all the people that he has playing with him have such good ears and, dynamics and know how to, allow someone like myself and my tiny little mandolin to step into the fold, but like, know how to make the pieces fit together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love that. I love hearing big ensembles in any context, and it's hard to carry a big ensemble on the road. It's expensive. But he's been able to kind of bring that something of a classic R&B sound and modern funk and jam band and fuse it all together. And then he does it with this incredible personality. And that one seemed like a perfect fit. Now, one that I was surprised to see you on, but apparently it was a long tour, was the Allman Betts reunion tour. And that was kind of more, I don't know how to put it, but I mean, it's the Allman Brothers classic material. It's all the Southern rock and some, chains on your wallets kind of guys coming out to see the show. And you came on toward the end and like brought your thing. How did that come together?
I was surprised to see me on that one too, Craig. I didn't do the whole tour, for what it's worth. I did the 4 or 5 shows as part of the tour with them last year, and then got invited back to join them on some shows this year. And those guys are so great. They're like, look at this tour and come out on as many dates as you can or want to, which is such a sweet offering. And last year I didn't know, or I guess year before last now, I didn't know what to expect, because I thought, that was not an offer I was expecting to get. And, my agent sent this over and was like, hey, these guys want to know if you want to come out. And I was like, I wonder, do they want me to play acoustic? Because I play some electric too. Like, what are they thinking, And it was like a really beautiful experience getting to meet all those people. I mean, the Allman catalog is so good. It really is. And I mean, of course, songs whether you think you do or not from the Allman Brothers catalog just by kind of existing in life and hearing stuff on the radio or hearing it on a commercial. And the nerdy little bluegrasser in me, very much remembers from the early Alison Krauss recording of Midnight Rider.
Oh yeah.
And so like that was probably how I first even knew that song. But my dad was a fan of 80s rock music and loved the Allman Brothers too. So like I definitely knew some of it. But getting to be out on the tour, which has a lot of different guests, by the way. So it's like a lot of different people. And just getting to hear these different, interpretations of the songs on the shows that I got to be out for. And also seeing the audiences, because, I think for a lot of people, there's people that come to those revival shows that saw, Devin and Dwayne's dads play hundreds of times over, it's like a real following, kind of like different, but kind of like the Grateful Dead, in that these songs just are woven in the fabric of their lives and they mean so much to them. Yeah. So to like look out, it's like it's not even about any of us actually doing the songs as much as it is about the songs themselves and what they mean to people. So getting to be a part of something like that where you feel, I don't know, that tour was special because I thought it's not about like me coming out here and being the artist doing the song. It's more about being the vessel to deliver this song that these people are so desperate to hear, and that means so much to them. So
and add a new flavor to it that they've never really heard.
Yeah,
so.
It's really special. And Devin and Dwayne are now just dear friends. I didn't know them at all before that tour, but just wonderful humans, and I love those guys. Grateful to have made that connection.
Special stuff. We got a few minutes left, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your past. I'm going to put the interview we did, the first big long interview we did from 2018, up next to this on the web. But so not to revisit everything, but a couple things occurred to me I'd love to hear you talk about now, kind of with perspective of years. And one is going from Tennessee to Berklee and the stretch where you were secure that you knew people cared about your music because you had a record deal and you were touring and doing busy, we've talked about it being kind of just this whirlwind where you're in class and then it's whipping off for a weekend and doing a date or two and then coming back. But with perspective, how do you think that those years, college years change all of us, but how did they change you?
I do think as much as the musical experience itself, because the musical experience, though it was an incredible thing to get to be a part of, it wasn't something so much that I thought I was going to do. Like I hadn't been prepping for years to go to Berklee. I was this little bluegrass kid who couldn't wait to get out of school and get to just go play shows and experience music in the community that I was kind of already a part of, And so then the opportunity to go to Berklee came. It was too good of an opportunity with the particular scholarship I got to pass up. I was like, I have to at least go give this a try. So in a weird way, it was sort of just being thrust into this thing at what felt like the last minute on accident because life just handed me this gift. Okay. And I didn't know what I wanted out of it. I didn't even know where to begin because I'd never studied music in any kind of formal way like that. I grew up going to a jam session where somebody says, hey kid, here's how you play a G chord and let me show you this tune called Old Joe Clark, and you learn to sing harmonies through growing up in church and hearing music and listening to albums. And it's such a different kind of experience than being in a classroom with other people your own age too. Yeah. So I think just the experience of, as cliche as it sounds, but just moving from Byrdstown, my little town in Tennessee of like 700 people, to Boston and being around people, in Byrdstown is a beautiful part of the world to grow up in, but it's very rural. Everybody around there kind of shares a similar accent and looks the same and a lot of the same beliefs and, morals and things like that, which is a beautiful thing to get to be in what feels like its own little bubble. Mm-hmm. But also, and it's a very just safe, comfortable place where you go to the grocery store and everybody knows everybody and that kind of a thing. And a lot of support as a young person, I felt, but then you get thrust into this completely, moving from there to Boston, it's a different life experience, let alone getting to be surrounded by so many young people, which was different for me. And also, I had people that I knew, like bluegrassers I'd met at like Kids on Bluegrass, even people like Sarah Jarose or Molly Tuttle, Corey Walker, like people that I hung out with and was friends with, but, I didn't have those people around all the time to talk about music with or sit down and have those conversations. So to just have young people around that you could really be excited about music with and people from different walks of life that grew up very differently than me, different countries, different accents. Sure. It's there I learned how thick my Tennessee accent was at the time, especially.
Well, and when there's one way of looking at the Molly Tuttles and the young players that were there, these are your new peer group, but this was also kind of a historic time in Boston, this stretch of about a decade when they developed their roots music program. It became a magnet for people that wanted to play bluegrass in an expansive way, but also and some very technical players play, really mastering of their instruments. And I think that there's been kind of a diaspora, if you will, of the musicians that went there in the late 90s and to about 2010, and they're the players that we talk about as the cream of today's string band musicians. So that must have been a real hot house, for development, and just the jams must have been pretty high level.
I mean, it was a really cool. It's cool for me now, even looking back and thinking about how many folks that now have since relocated to Nashville. Like, being a Tennessee gal, I kind of always knew I'd wind up here in Nashville. But I think for some of these folks, Nashville became a spot they decided to come after Boston. They had their hopes set on Boston the whole time. For me, it was like I kind of by accident wound up in Boston for a little bit and kind of delayed my Nashville roots, and it's really cool, like thinking about all the people from, I mean, I could just name a whole laundry list of people that were there at the time that I was there, but it was the first year of the American Roots program when Matt Glaser and the folks up there decided to start this program. So there was a lot of just love and encouragement put on this style of music around that time. So I was lucky to get to be there at that time, for sure. It did have a real, like, fresh new excitement in the air.
Yeah. Do you think it I'm sure, it helps your playing, it helps your singing, and your composing. And in a composing mindset, the way you write your instrumentals now and your ability to hang with that complex music of Bela Fleck, for example, was that are you particularly grateful for that aspect, to be able to sort of hear and conceptualize music in a much more layered and complicated way?
Yeah, well, it's also kind of funny, though, because I still feel like such a amateur on so many levels. It's like the way I think about music is still so, hilariously rooted in the early days of how I learned to play. The guys in my band are all, such studious musicians and can easily, write things on a page and count all the crazy bars. And then sometimes I'm the one over here writing the weird music, or not the weird music, but, I'll write something and have, like, oftentimes I'll write something with no concept of, like, what keys or what time signature I'm writing in. And then somebody like, Mark will be like, oh yeah, well that's a bar 5 there. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Like I think about it after the fact usually, because I'm still just one of those musicians who tends to, explore music without trying to think about any of that stuff, if that makes sense. But yes. I do feel like all the experiences of having, yes, my Berklee experience going into playing, music that requires a certain level of, like, diving into the technicalities of the music, certain things with, whether it's Bela or whoever, it does strengthen all that other stuff too, in a way that I'm so grateful for, and inevitably does help the communicating about music, more than anything, I think. Right.
And then you mentioned the inevitability, in a sense, of moving to Nashville, but I've never actually asked you when you moved and kind of what it felt like to be here the first 6 months and how you got acclimatized.
Yeah, well, I already knew a lot of people here, thankfully. Just having grown up in Tennessee, I wasn't too far from my family. Moving here, my folks are just a couple hours away. And Justin, my now husband, was already here. I had a lot of friends that already were here in Nashville, but my scholarship at Berklee was for a 4-year degree, and then I ended up being offered this thing called an artist diploma program, which was a little bit more flexible in terms of my touring and scheduling and being able to do some more one-on-one kind of stuff. So I had a bit of an unconventional Berklee experience in some ways, but I ended up doing 4 semesters at Berklee, and one in which I was gone on tour a lot, but they were so welcoming and said, "Come on, we'll figure it out. We'll try our best to keep you caught up," and all that stuff. And so they were so gracious and just kind to me about all that. But I did 4 semesters, so I wasn't there during the summer, but I did 4 regular semesters, so kind of 2 years in Boston, and then moved in the summer of 2011.
Okay.
To Nashville. And yeah, being here, I think this felt kind of like coming home to me. And maybe if I had moved here, because I was 17 when I graduated high school and moved to Boston. And at that point, I think one of the big things about that moment too is my mom drove me up. I think I played a gig in Pennsylvania on the way up, and then we drove on to Boston, moved me into my dorm, and then I remember her driving away, and I cried, and I thought, well, I'm never going to live in Byrdstown again. Like I knew that was the end of my time at home.
Yeah.
You know?
And she cried too. When
I'm
she was
sure.
driving,
I mean,
of course.
and because I knew Nashville would be next.
Yeah.
You know, so
right.
I always knew Nashville would be home for me, even, you know, long before Berklee was a thing. I kind of always thought Nashville would be where I would kind of plant my long-term roots. And, I love it here. And I think
let's wrap up with just sort of letting people hear your take on how this amazing scene has built on its history. I'm continually gushing about the fact that I've been here 25 plus years watching this music scene and never been disappointed and never felt like, well, there's a lull now, but it'll be back. It's unbelievable how it's continued to generate the magnet for new people and the talent development of folks like yourself and your peers.
Well, yeah, it's funny. So, well, one thing I was going to say is that from having gone to Boston first, I think when I moved to Nashville, I felt like I was moving back home. Mm-hmm. Maybe if I had moved just from Byrdstown to Nashville, Nashville would have felt like the big city. But for me, there was a sense of coming back home and a peacefulness. And I love Boston, but getting to be here. So folks often ask, well, how do you like Nashville? And I think that my answer is always, maybe I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm probably biased because this just feels like home to me, you know, being born and raised here in Tennessee and you know, the love that I have for the community here in Nashville goes so deep back to my early years of occasionally getting to come here and play music. And now as I've seen so many of my friends move here, like I kind of always knew I'd be here just because this is kind of where I'm from in a way and home. But like seeing all my friends who maybe went to New York first or stayed in Boston for a while or from the West Coast or whatever, eventually moved to Nashville and fall so in love with it too. It's you know, it's easy for me to relate to it because I've always just loved the scene here. And I mean, the diversity of the musical styles we have here now, I think a lot of people think...
significantly since you moved.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think country music, and there's, you know, no shortage of that. But gosh, any night of the week, you can go hear just such incredible, you know, interesting music of all styles. And I love that about getting to live here.
You need a club residency at some point. I'd love to see you do something that periodically brings together a lot of guests.
I would love to do that. I've thought about it for sure. So one of these days I will.
Sierra, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time, and good luck with the new record.
Thank you. I appreciate you helping spread the word, and always great to talk to you.
All right. Peace.